Shadowverse.
Greetings, I'm Shad, and if you're wondering why I'm joined by a very short individual right here, that should be self-explanatory by the title of this video. I actually want to explore a little bit about if little people like halflings, hobbits, could actually use normal-sized weapons, and what would the conversion really be, and how feasible, and so on and so forth. So I'm joined here by my son, whom whenever he's on a video, we use different names and their real names, and his code name is Thor, or a Thunder Warrior, for reasons that he gained when he was very young. He was very loud, in other words. But I'm also joined by another helper who's joined us over on Night's Watch, and that's Claudia. Come and say hi, Claudia.
I'm also short.
I was gonna say the reason why Claudia's gonna be helping me out is because she's so short. Look how thing is, so my wife is about probably even shorter, so she's not my wife, by the way. So Claudia is almost a pretty good approximate for the size of the standard fantasy dwarf, which is what? 4 and 5 foot is usually the height, I think, for fantasy dwarves. And my son here is a good approximate for the standard height of fantasy halflings, hobbits, or gnomes. Now, a lot of this video, actually, I don't think we're going to be dwelling too much on dwarves, because I think a lot of fantasy and D&D and things get it pretty much right. Even if you're 4 or 5 foot around there, you're 5 foot something, I'm assuming?
No idea.
Okay. Oh, all right, we need a tape measure. All right. Oz, I might need your help with this. So, just to be scientific and official in all this, could you hold this? Actually, I probably don't need your help, Oz. It's in centimeters. Damn it, we need one in like inches and feet. All right, conversion time, Nathan.
5 feet 2 inches.
5 feet 2 inches. So you're like only 2 inches, which makes 5 feet 2. Like probably so obvious I didn't need to say. But maybe I don't know. Even if you're a little, like that's closer. Probably right here is closer to fantasy dwarf thing. She's just too tall. Why are you so damn tall, Claudia? Gosh.
Not a question I've ever heard in my life.
Tallest midget.
And my son here is
3.4 feet.
3.4 feet. So this is pretty close, okay? So for dwarves, or people almost dwarven size, the conversion actually I think works mostly. Like if you hold this sword, you could use that sword, don't you think, Claudia?
Yeah.
Yes, you could. Two-handed? Yeah, I'll hold the axe. And so if you've looked at my Fantasy Rearm video on best weapons that a dwarf could use, dwarves are shorter but stocky and built, okay? And because they have a lot of strength, like fantasy dwarves I'm talking about, they could handle most other weapons, really. See, even the tallest weapons in the standard medieval repertoire, I think, you know, you could use that, don't you think? Let's have a look. You reckon you could use that one?
Taller than her.
It is. It is.
Yeah.
Yeah, just chopping people up, and the key, like, main thing people will be really looking at is if someone has the requisite strength to be able to use them. Fantasy dwarves would have a lower center of gravity. That could actually help them out a little bit.
I could build a sword made of wood.
Yeah,
Fine.
just fine.
What about a spear?
Spear, I reckon they could handle a spear as well. The big discussion, I think, is when we get to this height right here. So thank you, Claudia. I appreciate your help. So what I'm interested with little Thunder Warrior here is the conversion. He is about half the height of me. Now, one of the things that would affect combat, and I think I mentioned this in my Fantasy Rearm video looking at best weapons for, like, you know, hobbit, halfling-sized people, is the square cube law. Because my son is about half the height of me, that means he has 4 times less surface area and 8 times less volume. And so he'll weigh, on average, an 1/8 as much as someone who is twice as high. Weight is a big thing that affects the amount of force and power you can generate. And this is not really reflected properly, I feel, in a lot of fantasy settings, where on average halflings, they get maybe -2 strength. That would be limited in a greater amount. Have you ever noticed that in boxing and things that they match people up according to weight category, not strength capacity? Because there are actually some really short people who can get pretty jacked and they can curl a decent amount just on their biceps, but the amount of power you can actually generate when you're striking or punching is actually very much determined by weight. Being so short is actually going to be a very detrimental thing. But weapons are force multipliers, and you actually don't need a lot of force to do lethal damage with a weapon. So this could actually balance it out. Now, what I wanted to cover here, we also joined by our new hound.
It's Thunder Warrior's steed.
Thunder Warrior's steed. Is the comparison, I actually want to get a feel of how big weapons would be if I was this size as well. And so if I compare this, right? This longsword is higher than him, okay? This is greater in comparison to him even using a greatsword. For this greatsword to be equivalent in comparison, yes, if you could hold that there, would need to be about up to here. And it's usable for me, but the conversion really would be that this is effectively a greatsword for someone of this size. Do you like that? Do you want to pick it up and try and use it? Ready? I'll get a foam one. Can you use that? Try and get me. Ah! Ah! That was one of the tactics I said in my best weapons for short people, is that they could go for the legs, like, and if they can protect their upper body, actually, he can with the, like, anyway, go watch that video because he's using the tactics. Can you get me? Oh, coming down. Oh, deflection. So, longsword is definitely at least greatsword in conversion, but it absolutely would be usable for them, all right? Now, should they take a reduction in damage capacity? I'm not sure. My son is young, and so his muscles are not fully developed and things, and if we were trying to translate to a fantasy person, we could, I think, fairly conclude enough that the muscle strength that they could have could be somewhat equivalent to what a regular-sized person could get, maybe a little bit less, but it's around that ballpark. The weight is a big issue, but again, we're using weapons. And so I've done a video on how a lot of role-playing games and video games misunderstand weapon damage, that smaller weapons, even daggers, they should be doing at least as much damage as a spear, or even larger. They could do crazy amounts of damage. And for that reason, I actually think the damage penalty shouldn't really be there too much. I mean, maybe only a little bit. In unarmed, they should get a big penalty, but when you're actually using a weapon now, this is different. So let's have a look at this. Oh my goodness, so this, this arming sword is greatsword size for him. That is legitimate greatsword size. The proportions would be rather different. He can get a two-handed grip on that pretty effectively, so, and all right, Thunder Warrior, what if you hold it down here? Can you hold a hand there? How does that work a bit better? Can you swing it around? Go, ah. It's workable. But an arming sword basically equates to still a greatsword. It is his full height. So, wow, all right. I'm trying to see where the comparison is. What would be a more functional and usable weapon? Let's go down to short sword and see what size we're at there. So, a short sword is about war sword height for a halfling. This comes up about to my armpit, and if we have a look right here, about the same height right there. The difference is the proportions of these swords are actually quite different. The handle would be about here, the crossguard would be a bit shorter if this was actually arming sword proportions, and so you wouldn't have as much of a handle. You'd be more closer to holding it almost like this. This is definitely a usable sword. If I was pretending I was this height using an arming sword now, so 3 foot tall, okay, this is definitely still usable. And arming sword would be, yeah, one of the primary two-handed weapons. Sorry, short sword, that's a short sword. And then arming sword is most definitely a two-handed greatsword equivalent weapon now. You got a sword?
You got a war face? Let's see a war face.
Go, can you give a war cry? Ah! Ah! These ones are, we got to be a bit more careful with these. They're not lob safe ones. Yeah, you got it. That would definitely be usable. I don't think this weapon, the arming sword, should get a damage penalty, but they should get the bonus of using weapon in two hands. So most standard role-playing games give a bit of a bonus, like D&D usually gives 0.5 your strength bonus again when you two-hand a weapon. So usually when you use a weapon, you get your strength bonus, and then nature hand gives half that bonus again. I think that works really well. And actually, I'm going to do a video because it's also been confirmed in tests recently that using a second hand basically increases the power generated by 50%. This is one of the things that kind of annoyed me with the Hobbit movies. I wasn't sure Sting translated too accurately, but let's actually get something that's more Sting sized. So something happened with Dungeons & Dragons 3 to 3.5. In Dungeons & Dragons 3, they simply said, all right, if you're using this type of weapon and you're a halfling, they basically convert to a larger size weapon. And I thought that worked well. But then in 3.5, they just said, no, halflings need weapons specifically built for them. And so a halfling size, it'll basically be called a halfling greatsword, would do less damage, so D8, D10 or whatever. I think that also works because we're seeing a problem with proportion. This is a warsword length weapon for my little guy. And what we're seeing here is the proportions aren't right for someone this size using a warsword. You want a larger handle with more leverage. You could still use it. So I think it would be perfectly fair for a halfling to just pick up an arming sword and basically use the functional, not damage, but how it functions, same way as like, you know, if they have warsword in this setting. I think the default one is bastard sword because bastard sword is a longsword equivalent in lots of D&D when I think there should be two different weapons. All right, but I want to see this length sword. So let's have a look. That comes up to your hip, okay? And let's see, this short sword doesn't come up to my hip. So this arming sword does. So this larger dagger right here is the arming sword equivalent for someone this size. I remember reading The Lord of the Rings. Actually, you know, this was Lord of the Rings, where they get the daggers out of the burrow. And they mentioned that they were daggers, but in the size of someone, in the hands of someone this size, they were effectively the length of a proper sized sword for them. And I wasn't sure I could see the translation, but here, actually comparing the one-to-one, this is very much accurate. This is a large dagger, granted. You would almost call it a small short sword. This is a pretty hefty dagger. If I have a hold of this, what would you call it? Like, this is still dagger territory?
Yep.
But it's certainly on the larger end of daggers. So if you had a large dagger specifically, that would most definitely equate to arming sword. That's the most primary, common one-handed sword for a halfling or hobbit. Or gnome, don't forget gnomes. I like gnomes. Why were they taken out as a primary character class? It's not fair. I don't think a dagger of this size should really get a damage penalty in the hands of someone this big. I think they could get decent leverage, get enough penetration to do very lethal damage, and they're not restricted by torque. Right? So when you get a bigger weapon, their size would start to affect how easily it would be to redirect the sword because if the sword's bigger in comparison to their frame. But the comparison is pretty clear. So remember, this arming sword is greatsword to him. And so if people don't get a penalty in wielding a great sword in comparison to their size, I don't think a halfling or hobbit should get, or gnome, should get a penalty in using an arming sword in a greatsword way in comparison to their size either. And damage penalty, I'm not so sure either. Let me know in the comments, what do you think? But you got, so that and a shield would be great, wouldn't it? That would be like primary weapon, eh? Get in close. Yeah.
Hey, Shad.
Yes.
What a little hobbit person lacks in power, they make up for in stamina because they're eating all the time. Their metabolism's crazy.
That's actually a really good point because the square cube law, like I said, it applies in reverse. And so if they have, like their muscle capacity can actually be pretty high, but they're moving around less weight, less mass, by a factor of 8 on average. And so if he was only, say, 20% less strong than me because he doesn't have the frame to build up same size muscles, but we actually see people with dwarfism, they can actually build up almost same size muscles. There's a reason why they have the proportions they do. And their muscle growth usually is about the same as normal. It's their bone growth that doesn't match. And that's why they get very distinct proportions that we see them with. But that's the point that I'm raising, is that their muscle strength can actually be almost equivalent at times. But then if they're moving around less weight, it depends again, because it wouldn't be a perfect one. If they have larger muscle mass, they wouldn't be maybe an 8. They might be closer to a 1/4 of the weight. It depends. But still, if they have that strength and they're moving around less weight, they should get a stamina buff bonus or something like that. They get unique bonuses that I talked about in the video. What would the best weapons for, characters of this size be? And one is like, they could just, they're the leg hitters. They can snipe at the legs. Usually hitting the legs is harder because it's easier to defend and you're going to slip the legs and move back. But if they have a shield and they get in close, these guys would actually be really hard to fight.
What about as rogues?
Of course they would get, you know, harder to spot, so like rogue buffs, bonuses and things. So just because they're shorter doesn't mean they should be discounted out. And I'm not sure they ever are, because people love playing the short characters. So thank you, Thunder Warrior, for helping me in the video. You are a great assist. And so the real question is, before we end, we only went up to like longsword. We need to see if he could use the bigger weapons. So this is war sword size, almost greatsword area. In comparison to, there's a bit of a height difference. Do you reckon you could use this sword? Yeah, so give me that one. So you hold a hand up here and a hand down. You put that one down, there you go. And let's see, ready? Can you fight me with that? Go, oh, you can. Here, try and hit again. Go all the way around. Here, do a big swing, go, So, it's actually usable. It would be awkward. What are you laughing at?
Put a health bar glove. It's like Elden Ring.
Yeah, I know, right? It is like he's using an Elden Ring sword. It's huge for him. Ah, you got it. I have explored using crazy oversized weapons like a Sephiroth sword. And when you focus on like circular attacks, so if you're, you know, going around like this, you can actually use it. One of the biggest issues that kind of came up in the Sephiroth video was transporting it and moving around, and it'll get caught on doors. But because the sword isn't bigger, the person using it is smaller, so you can actually get this sword in and out of environments, buildings, you know, if you just hold it up next to you, and you wouldn't be hitting the roof because the sword isn't bigger, like I said. It's bigger in comparison to the person. So I actually think halflings and halfling-sized characters could get away with using even bigger weapons. Because remember, if they have the strength and they would have a lower center of gravity, he's doing it. See, can you do like big swings? Like, that's the way you got it. You can totally do it. And again, you might be saying, oh, come on, Shad, a real weapon would be much heavier. But I think this balances out because a real halfling would be much stronger than my son here. And so the weight of weapon might be about as heavy to them as this Larpon is to my son. And it could still be usable. I actually think hobbits and halfling-sized people can still use some of the larger sized weapons, even if they're ridiculously oversized. Look, it's Elden Ring. It's totally Elden Ring, but it's justified because they would actually have the more feasible strength to lift it. You got it? Go! Yes, you go for the legs. Right in the Achilles heel. Can you lift it up high and go down? Oh, you got it! Oh! You got me. I don't think small characters should be restricted from even using the bigger ones, but we also see what the comparison was thanks to the help of my son. And also thank you, Claudia, for helping us out as well. And thank you for watching. I hope this has been helpful. Share your comments. What are your thoughts in the comments below about the strength differences, leverage and other things? I'd really love to read them and look forward to reading them. And of course, I hope to see you on the next video here on Shadiversity. So until that time, farewell.